Hello and welcome to today's Just Chopsing Podcast. And I feel like I've got two guests today because not only have we got Mike from Night Swims, we've also got Steve filling in for David because David's gone down with COVID again.
Oh man, I just got over it myself. So,
Yeah, I've already had it twice. Last year it nearly killed me. So,
Yeah, I
um,
had it in May, and that took me out of commission for about a month.
yeah, it took me out of commission for nearly a year. So,
well, I'm glad you're here now. It definitely was not fun. I managed to avoid it for a good solid 20 months, but it finally caught up with me. Um,
yeah.
yeah, as well as the rest of the band, we had to end up canceling a couple shows, which was kind of a bummer. But that's the way these things go. At least I got my health.
Yeah, that's what's important, you know. I mean, I
Yeah.
was really ill. Well, I don't want to go into it. We've spoken about it on so many podcasts now that, COVID's like a running theme, I think, through our shows.
Yeah, and I'm sure at this point people are just like, all right, everybody's gotten it. I don't want to hear about it anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, apparently it's really bad in Wales again.
Yeah,
oh, is it?
yeah.
Yeah, it's up to one person in 20.
Oh, geez. Yeah, we're kind of. I mean, the states for the most part have been kind of surging this whole time, but it's gotten really bad in Southern California where I live right now. I had mentioned earlier that one of my band members got it, and so we had to cancel a gig, but I ended up playing it solo, and it was a smaller show. There was maybe like 55, 60 people there, but it ended up being a super spreader event, and like 16 people got COVID there,
Oh,
including me. So I
yeah,
guess
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess that's the way things go.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Now,
So,
I was just going to ask, in terms of the band, I mean, it seems like the way you guys have come together is kind of a bit more backward compared to some other bands, because with other bands, you have a group of people and then they'll try and put a bunch of songs together. Whereas in your case, I think it was, you were very productive over about a year of writing a couple of songs a week. And then almost building the band around that. I mean, so how did that come about as an idea in terms of taking those songs and then transferring them to a band almost?
Well, yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it perfectly. First off, it is definitely backwards. I've always been in bands where, yeah, you do exactly what you say. You work on some songs for, maybe a year or two, and then you go and record some demos. When I first started writing this, it was I because of COVID, the bands kind of disbanded, and nobody knew what was going on at that time. So it was just like, all right, well, see you when I see you, I guess. And none of them were very serious projects, so I was fine with kind of stepping away. But I'd always wanted to start my own thing, and I was like, all right, well, I'm not doing anything right now. There's no excuse. So I just got to writing. And originally it was just going to be myself. And I was just going to, you know, write an album from the bottom up. And slowly but surely it kind of took on a bit more of a grandiose scale than I was prepared for, just because that's kind of how it was flowing. And so I originally tapped into who's now my bassist, David Savoyan, because he worked as an engineer. And I'm like, hey, I'd like to, start recording some demos, see how this stuff sounds. And about halfway through the demo session, he was like, well, why don't I just play bass for you? And I was like, all right, we can do that. And so it started there, and then started doing some outreach. A lot of people were pretty um skeptical just because of COVID, the way that it was at the time. They were, not wanting to meet. So I couldn't tap into resources of people that I actually knew. So it was kind of like finding people that were like, all right, throw caution to the wind, let's do this. And so I went through a lot of people though in that first year of trying to, mold this group. About 7 different drummers in 6 months and a handful of guitarists, but eventually landed on the solid lineup that I have now, which is Nathan Atwood, who plays drums, and then Tucker Bancroft, who is our lead guitarist. And then we also have a third guitarist who kind of floats for our live shows. His name's Tim Powers.
okay.
Yeah. So I mean, again, going back to it, it was just originally going to be a personal thing, but then ended up being a band. So
And you said
Seems timing.
you went through a few people. You said,
yeah.
how did you know if somebody was the right fit?
Generally about one song into a rehearsal. um and I think it should be this way, like if you're really kind of pushing to have this be a bit more than just fucking around, you have to, have some serious talent behind you. And you'll run into this a lot when you're trying to start a band, is a lot of people like to um, overcompensate their abilities a bit through talking, and that becomes pretty clear cut halfway through just the first song alone. And I mean, I'm very much one to practice, and I rehearse 6-7 hours every single day, whether it be playing guitar, writing songs, playing piano, whatever other instrument. And I kind of I expect that out of the same people that are joining me, just that commitment level. And so that's really what it comes down to. And then I mean, also there were some really good players that came through that just stylistically they weren't quite understanding it, because I mean, as you've listened, the music's pretty spacey. There's a lot of room in it, and it's hard to find people that are like not wanting to fill every single second of every single song with some noise. I very much believe in letting songs breathe. And yeah, so
How long have you been playing music or making music even?
well, I've been playing music since I was 6.
Okay.
Started off piano and guitar, and then worked my way into band and middle school, which is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade here. And started playing horns, brass, trombone, trumpet, and things of that nature, and just kind of got obsessed with instruments in general. uh as far as songwriting though, I mean, I started that like almost immediately. It just was just kind of natural. The first time I picked up a guitar, it was, my dad had this beautiful Guild acoustic, and I just picked it up, and instead of like learning notes or chords, I just started singing and playing. Of course, it was terrible, I'm sure. But yeah, it just got the songwriting side of music probably spoke to me more than anything else. I never set out to be in it like a guitar, god or anything like that. It's just I wanted to write music, and definitely was more concerned with, I suppose, being an artist rather than just solely a musician.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So, and as I alluded to earlier, played in a lot of bands growing up, but always just played kind of second fiddle to other people's music.
Okay.
Um,
So is this your first actual band then? Your
yeah,
band?
this is my first one. And these are, to be perfectly frank with you, I mean, I grew up playing like folk music and like country music, just me solo.
Mm.
But this is really the first time I ever took on the task of writing fully orchestrated music, as
Okay.
far as the drums, everything else. So it was a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
And also an arduous one. You never realize how much work actually goes into it until you're doing it.
Yeah, that's true. But that's,
Um,
that's like anything worthwhile, really, isn't it?
yeah, I definitely, I'm feeling more satisfied probably than I ever have playing music right now.
Yeah.
And as soon as we released this first record, I had already started on a bunch of songs. So right now I think I'm around the 60 or 70 song mark.
Okay.
I got another full length that we're starting to prep for, and just started rehearsals actually yesterday with the band on some of the new material. So we're just going to keep plugging them out, as long as it feels good and it feels right. I'm definitely not forcing it.
Yeah.
As far as the songwriting.
Are you going back to songs that you written when you were a kid?
No, everything. I very much believe in the stream of consciousness idea, which is like once I've moved past something,
Hmm.
I've moved past it. I don't really, I don't really like to revisit things that say I wrote a year ago, because I'm in a different place myself and it doesn't feel honest anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you had this obviously prolific period where you'd written this bunch of about 100 songs, and you wanted to whittle that down to 10 songs for
Yeah.
I mean, how do you go about a process like that, where something so personal as writing songs, and you've got a big bunch of songs that all mean something to you, then taking that, I mean, I assume Dave would have helped with this, but to decide, which of those get carried forward, I suppose.
So I would say that, to stupefy my answer, it's probably that if, as far as this album is concerned, I wanted to tell a story. I wanted it to be a bit not conceptual by any means, but it definitely has a certain resonance across the whole thing. And I was waiting for that moment where I felt like, okay, I have the songs that are kind of the beginning of this book and the end of it, and there's chapters in between, and anything that feels a bit saturated or redundant is when it just kind of hit the chopping block. And I've talked to other musicians, and they have, a lot of my friends, a lot of people have a really hard time letting go of material that they've written. For me, it's kind of the opposite. It was pretty easy, actually. Like if I was looking, in keeping the songs that are on Idlewild, first off, as I mentioned, like really working on telling the story that I wanted to tell, but also I was looking for a retention value to them. And so like, that's where really isolation, being kind of closed off and just working on this really helped me, in the sense that I would just revisit things constantly. And if it didn't hold up for me, even if it's just a week later or a month later, it was kind of like, all right, like this needs to go. Like, I mean, as much as maybe I loved it when I first originally wrote it, it's like, I'm not loving it now. And, I kind of, that's an honesty that you have to have with yourself as a songwriter, I believe, that a lot of people, in my world anyway, that I've spoken to, have a bit more trouble with. I'm very much for trimming the fat, essentially. Like, if it came down to it, I could have done the really pretentious thing of just releasing a double album on my first album. But nobody's gonna want to fucking listen to that.
So what are your influences then? Because where'd you get the name for your album from? Idlewild. Isn't there a band called Idlewild?
I'm not sure if there's a band. I'm sure there is. Every name has been taken as proof is in the pudding with the night swims thing earlier on that we were talking about. So it came from in May of 2020, 2021, May of 2021. We went and recorded our demos up in a area called Idlewild, California.
Okay.
And it's this mountain town. It's called the High Pines region, and we just rented out a cabin. That was originally going to be our recording for the album. I wanted to kind of go for this Guma OK Computer approach and just rent out a house and just see what would happen. Unfortunately, we don't have the budget of 30 days spending in a Airbnb, so we did a 9-day period where I think we logged something like 170 hours of recording in 9 days. And when we got back down from the mountain, me and Dave, we started mixing the record. Because again, this was originally what we were going for, was, the full length album. And we were like, this is a goddamn mess. Like, and, the most arduous part about songwriting is not the songwriting itself. It's not the recording, it's the editing and it's the post. And when you have 170 hours logged and you didn't do any like edits as you were recording, you just look at this and you're like, what did we do? Like, this was a huge mistake. And so we eventually like kind of got some demo material out of it, but it was pretty pretty quick after we came down that it's like, okay, we're gonna have to go into a proper studio and re-record this all and work with an engineer who's editing as we go along. And
Yeah.
so that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's where the name came from, is Idlewild.
Oh, right. Okay. Did you see any mountain lions?
No, but I did see a bobcat.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess those are technically different, but they're still big and scary.
Yeah. They're a bit smaller than a mountain lion, I think.
Yeah. But there's a lot of that, a lot of lizards. I mean, California, it's got pretty cool wildlife. I'm originally from Chicago, so the concrete jungle does not offer anything besides roaches and rats.
Windy, in it?
Yeah, a bit windy. I moved away from there a little over 7 years ago. I couldn't take it anymore. It was I grew up in the Midwest, lived there my whole life, and I was done. We had a polar vortex the year before I moved out, and it was, I want to say, around -20 Fahrenheit with the wind chill, and I got stuck at work because the whole city closed down because we had this polar vortex come through. And I left work, and at the time I'm still pretty poor, but at that time I was even poorer. And so I was wearing Chuck Taylors with holes in the bottom of them, and I had to walk 7 miles home. And it was just this primal scream therapy coming over me as I'm walking down these empty streets in 2 feet of snow with wet shoes. And it's just like, I can't do this anymore. So by the next year I was gone.
Yeah. I don't blame you, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's no fun, is it?
Not at all. Where I know you mentioned Wales, but where are you located?
I'm actually in the Netherlands now.
Oh, cool.
I'm from Wales. I mean, I grew up in Wales, but I moved over here about almost 25 years ago now.
Oh, beautiful. I love the Netherlands. I've spent some time there.
Yeah. Where
Yeah.
did you stay?
Rotterdam and Amsterdam.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I was actually living in Ireland for a while. And when I left Ireland to move back to the States, I made a detour through the Netherlands and stayed there for about, I want to say, about a month and a half.
Okay.
And just stayed on a friend's canal boat. So
Yeah.
it was kind of living the life, just waking up every day, not having anything to do. So just kind of roamed the town of Amsterdam, and then went up to Rotterdam, which I actually preferred, a little bit less opulent, and not as touristy. So it was kind of a bit more low key. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Well, I actually live just outside Eindhoven, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's where I flew into on Ryanair. That's where their
Yeah.
airport was located. Wow.
Yeah. Very good. So you didn't get into any funny stuff?
Oh no, I got into plenty of funny stuff. Yeah, I mean, I had a month and a half there, and I was 25 at the time, so and not sober yet. So definitely got in. Let's put it this way: I would have stayed longer, but the money ran out.
Yeah. But you could have got some good inspiration, I guess.
If I had remembered it. Like that. That's the trouble. Is the inspiration was definitely there. It was retaining it and bringing it back with me. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, same thing with Ireland. Actually, that was just a lot of drinking.
Yeah. I was going to say, what were you doing? Like working in bars or?
Yeah, working in bars. I was doing some busking, but man, the guys that busk out in Dublin, because I was living in Dublin, those guys are on another level. And at that point, I was not. I was nowhere near that. Like those guys, they grind. They do 8-9 hours a day, and I got a lot of respect for those guys. Because then they go do the bars at night as well. So it's a cool city though, because there's so many working musicians there.
Yeah.
And just working artists in general. Like I really enjoyed my time in Ireland. Would love to go back.
Yeah. I've been to Dublin a few times. So.
Yeah, it's a good city. I worked right outside the Temple Bar district at a bar called the Mercantile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which was it was a cool spot. It was owned by the same guy who owned Whelan's, so it had like that crossover. Which I don't know, for your listeners, Whelan's is a pretty famous music club in Dublin. But one of the coolest things that ever happened while I was there was I was in a lockout. I was working a lockout, and it was around 4 a.m. and in walks this dude who's a friend of the bartender that I was working with, and he's got his acoustic guitar. And my friend was like, "Hey, play us some songs." And it was just me, the other bartender, and like two other people. Starts singing, starts playing, and it turns out, man, it's slipping my the name, but it turns out it was the guy from the movie Once.
The
That
movie, what movie was that?
Once. It was like mid 2000s. It was about this Irish folk singer who married this who like hooked up with this Czech girl, and then they start playing music together. What is his name? He just became Glenn Hansard.
Okay, no, I don't know.
Yeah, Glenn Hansard. So he actually ended up winning an Oscar that year for that movie.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so he was just like this huge, like kind of legendary folk singer in Dublin. And I remember seeing the movie and I'm like, this guy's voice sounds so familiar. And he had ended and I'm like, "Hey, what is your name?" And he's like, "Glenn." And I'm like, "Oh." And then I started connecting the dots. So it was pretty cool to be in that sort of situation. And that was Dublin for me. That was like that in a nutshell. It was such an intimate place where some of the most unique experiences of my life musically happened.
Okay. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Did any of that translate over into your songs, into your songwriting?
I would say it definitely forced me to learn how to sing better because, man, the Irish, they can sing pretty well. And also, I think what it taught me more than anything, the definitive thing, is that they don't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
They have a bit of humor in everything that they do and a lot of self-effacing. And that's translated to me. I think at one point I had in my head that to be a musician, you can only be serious at all times.
Yeah.
And that culture kind of taught me, get over yourself. Like,
yeah. Well, they're all leprechauns in Ireland.
Yeah, something like that.
They're all about 3 foot tall.
I will say this, and hopefully nobody in Ireland comes at me for this. They're not the largest men, that's for sure.
No, it's funny really because you can tell different races, can you? I mean, if you look at Polish people, they all look the same. And if you go to somewhere like Ireland and you see real Irish people, they all look pretty much the same as well.
And it's funny, and like, so I'm married to a Slovakian, and she hates it because I tell her, I'm like, Slovak people look different than Czech people. She's like, we're all the same, and I'm like, no, you're not. There's very distinct differences, and of course she hates this, but I tend to call Slovak people moly people because they carry a lot of sunspots.
Okay.
But that's kind of an inside joke. She's going to hate that I mentioned that. She's definitely not getting a link to this now.
Well, my girlfriend's Asian and they definitely all look the same.
And the funny thing is, they'll say the same thing about us.
They do, actually. Yeah, she does. She's like, "You white people."
Yeah. And it's funny how you like, I have this running joke whenever that like comes up, like say somebody of a different ethnicity goes, "Oh, is your name, Nathan or David or something like that?" And I'm like, "No, we don't all look alike." So that's always my, counter.
Yeah, your retort.
Yeah, my retort. Yeah.
Very good. So you said that your album's not really a concept album then?
No, I would say
Where do you get your musical inspiration? What bands do you like?
So, I mean, some of my favorite band. First off, I always mention this. My favorite artist of all time is Jason Pierce from Spiritualized, and Spacemen 3. He's been one of the biggest influences on me. Might not come across in the sound because he's a bit more classic kind of songwriting, uses a lot of just strict major chords, and every song has like 4 chords and it's done. But what I drew inspiration from him on was his orchestration side and his symphonic side, and kind of building sound through space. A lot of English musicians I grew up being influenced by. That's probably predominantly my biggest kind of section of the world that's influenced me. Everything from this, you can name it, in the 60s, everybody from the Beatles, them, Them is actually speaking of them is actually one of my favorite bands of all time. And I always found it funny that, they were such good musicians, but they had to go to the States to look for a singer in Van Morrison. And I don't think I've really cared for anything else that Van Morrison's ever done besides the stuff that he did with them. But then, I mean, some songwriters that I'm big on, PJ Harvey is a huge influence on me. Just, again, not talking about musical styles, just who they are as a musician and, what they kind of bring to the table as an artist. Because for me, the most important thing is, sounding like yourself. If yourself sounds like somebody else, you can't really avoid that. But it's trying to strive for originality without it being too contrived, and Bjork is another one. Again, you're not going to hear this in my music, but she's just incredibly talented and such an innovator as far as music is concerned. Verve, huge influence. I mean, Nick Cave's guitar playing probably was one of my bigger influences growing up, as well as Graham Coxon from Blur.
Okay, yeah.
And then, man, I mean, is it okay if I keep going? I'm not sure if it becomes a bit of rambling after a while, but yeah, I mean, I would say growing up, it was interesting because as far as American music is concerned, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, so like grunge was big here, obviously, and that was what everybody was listening to, as well as I would say early hardcore rap and things of that nature, which both I'm a fan of. I grew up on both, but it was just English music that resonated with me more, I guess.
So you sort of went more like the Britpop route.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, also a lot of the late 80s stuff though, like the droning stuff, like Jesus and Mary Chain, are one of my favorites. And then, I mean, you could talk about more pop oriented stuff like The Cure. But yeah, I mean, as far as the 90s stuff is concerned, it was a lot of Britpop. The Charlatans, Blur.
Yeah, there was loads of it around at the time, wasn't it? You had the war between Oasis and Blur. You had the Charlatans, you had In Spiral Carpets, you had loads of rubbish. Like, well, I can't say it's rubbish, but that's just a loose term for it. But
yeah, it's funny. It's funny with Oasis is like, I mean, I absolutely, like, I will speak like most people volumes about their first two albums, but I never really gave a shit about anything else that they did. Like, and I mean, it is one of those things where the legend has it, right, that Noel wrote all those songs for both two records within the first year of songwriting. And I think, once Be Here Now came around, that was, obviously, again, a legendary disaster of a recording process for them. And I think I kind of had my fill of them at that point. Whereas Blur, I mean, they were a bit more transcendent for me, I mean, and I think, they definitely got their due. I think once Damon Albarn got big with Gorillaz, because then people were like, wait, who is this guy? A lot of them never, connected the dots and just started revisiting. And I remember it was like late 2000s when Boys and Girls all of a sudden became a huge hit again. And it actually like hit in the United States, whereas previously I think they had one song that ever like charted, and it was Song 2.
Okay, yeah.
And they were just never really paid attention to, but now you'll hear Park Life being played, but for me, my favorite album is 13. I think that's a beautiful album. And you want to talk about inspiration, that album inspired Idlewild probably in a way from beginning to end more than almost any other album. Because they were so experimental on that record and went for so many different unique sounds and genres that is really what turned me on to kind of doing a multi-genre type album.
Well, he never seems to sit still, does he, Damon Albarn?
No,
he's always moving and always looking for sounds, and he's very inventive, if you like.
And that's super inspiring for me as a songwriter and as a musician. Is like, I mean, I it's been interesting in the last 10 years because a lot of people have pigeonholed themselves into these niche genres. Everybody likes to give like a sub label to something. But at the same time, we're at this point with music where, I mean, the rules should have been thrown out the window a long time ago. That's the greatest thing about music, is there is no rules. But for some reason, we're in a place right now where everybody's kind of putting rules and limitations on what they're doing. And that, for me, I mean, do I listen to new music? Yes, I listen to some new music, but it's also gotten a bit boring to me, a lot of stuff. Like, a good example for this is what's happening in the States right now is, so I grew up on outside of like a lot of the Britpop and stuff, I grew up on a lot of American psych rock, and specifically bands like Brian Jonestown Massacre. And what Anton Newcomb's done is, you want to talk about prolific. I mean, he's what just released his 20th album, and he's an incredible, versatile musician. What he did in his early career showed that more, I think, than what you're hearing now, but that's besides the point. But what he did do is he inspired a lot of people to start playing psych rock music. But it's funny because psych rock music was always supposed to be this thing that was like, oh, it's psychedelic because it's different, it's unique, it's like using different concepts of sound. But now, is it really psych rock if everybody's playing it? I don't think so. And that's what I'm kind of experiencing right now. Like, is this interesting period where it's one of the most popular, like, kind of analog genres of music that I refuse to try to subject myself to, like, just because it's so goddamn boring to me. Every album that I hear, it's the same kind of like droning sounds and jangly guitars, and it's like, cool, man, like, you do you. Like, I respect anybody that's putting their stuff out there, but it's like, at what point are you going to want to start experimenting with all this different stuff that you can do? And that was kind of a goal of mine, is like, I hate the label that people have been giving us. It's called alternative rock or whatever. The connotations there just kind of make me, make me a little bit ill, just because when I hear alternative rock, I hear, the bands of the late 90s and early 2000s that nobody wants to listen to and nobody wants to be compared to. But now I'm kind of wearing it, I guess, as a badge of pride, because it's like, all right, I'm alternative. At least I'm not anything else that you can label me. Of course, at the same time, maybe it's dumb to even worry about that shit.
Yeah. That's the trouble with everything nowadays. Everything's got to be put into a box.
Labels,
given a label, given a subgenre.
Yeah.
How many genres are there for flipping sexuality, for example? There's like 34 or 37 or something. They, them, him, her.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's gone mad.
Yeah, I don't know why we've gotten to this point where everything is labeled. Like, what like, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the idea of like progressive, like, tendencies and ideologies to get away from labels and
I
to
think so.
like, to have freedom of expression, not freedom of deliberation over who is what? Like, it's such an odd thing to me.
Yeah. I mean, a dog is a dog, isn't it?
Dog's a dog and a cat's a cat. Yeah. It's like,
people have all of a sudden became everything they want to be except people.
yeah. And I mean, like, what happened to just being
you?
Like, what happened to just being you? Is like, it's a very, and of course the argument's been made, like, what kind of effect has social media had on all this? And I think it's been a huge one, right? Because people have found the echo chamber, of their choosing, and it reinforces their ideas and beliefs instead of questioning them.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was raised to question everything.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's going to make me sound a bit old, but it's weird to see a generation of young people not questioning what they're being told And
Yeah,
in fact, it's that to me is more dangerous than anything.
yeah. Of course it is. You know, they're just running along mindlessly.
Mindlessly. And I think, like getting back to what I do, I think a little bit that's a big reason why art has become boring, and a lot of people don't give as much of a shit as they used to about it, because why should you care about something that, has no real quality of identity to it?
Well, I've spoken about this before, and I put it down to just because we live in like a click-through society
Mm-hmm.
where everything is just click-through. I mean, you look at the TV, you can click through 100 channels if you like in a matter of minutes. You go on Spotify or any of the streaming services, and you can click through thousands of songs in a matter of minutes. If nothing grabs your fancy straight away, it's on to the next one and on to the next one. And I think that is probably the downside to social media, because you've got the click-through mentality with social media as well. And I mean, if you look at like now they brought out platforms like TikTok and Instagram where everything is seconds.
Yeah.
And that's translating into their real life. I say their younger generation. It's just translating into, and that's what makes their life real. And that's sort of giving them a purpose, that everything can be fixed in 15 seconds. But that's
Yeah.
not purposeful. It's not realistic.
No, and I mean, you kind of, especially with TikTok, right? Like, I mean, TikTok is the culmination of all this social media shit wrapped up into 15-second blips. And
it is.
I mean, people have talked about the genius of the application, because unlike other applications, it starts immediately. As soon as you open it, there's something in your face grabbing your attention, and then within 15 seconds it's done. And that for me is incredibly frightening, to think that we already had short attention spans as it is. Like, I mean, like the facts haven't changed that for what, the past 60, 70 years, the most popular music anyway has been the 3-minute pop song, right? And don't get me wrong, songs don't need to be more than 3 minutes. Like, I say that, and every single song on my album is more than 4 minutes long. But the reality is they don't need to be. But at the same time, we're going from 3 minute to 15 seconds. That's a huge jump. There was no natural evolution to this, and because it's not natural, that's the reason why. It's just not natural. And it's interesting to me, case in point, this recent it's made huge headlines, is the Kate Bush thing with Running Up the Hill. That song became enormous. What, she made like $3 million in a week off a song that was released 40 years ago, because it ended up in one of these 15-second blips. And what these kids discovered is, obviously, I don't know how it actually started. Or wait, it wasn't TikTok, was it? It was the TV show. TV show, yeah, but it was probably like a 15-second clip of like the hook, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a great way to be introduced to new music, and I'm not like hating on that by any means, but I wonder how many of those people, because Spotify, for instance, counts a stream as listening for 30 seconds, right? How many of those streams actually listened beyond that 30-second mark? Like, and I mean, good for her. She made a shit ton of money. That's a great song. But how many people actually, that's what I would love to know, is how many people actually listen to that full song.
Yeah. How many people actually decided to look up Kate Bush?
Finish, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and you look at sort of the capitalist tendency of this, is because of that, the fame that was like given to her from that song instantaneously, she deserves it, because she's been working her ass off for so many years. But there's so many people that are unknown that capitalized on it by putting out covers of this song almost immediately. Not because they have any connection to it, not because they gave a shit, but because they wanted the view, they wanted the like, they wanted the click. And don't get me wrong, I maybe I'm jaded, I don't look at that as them being smart marketing, like, hey, I'm
No.
going to do this so people look at my other stuff. They don't care about that.
No.
They just want that
Attention.
instant.
It's immediate,
Yeah.
isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, they just want the attention for
And the,
15
thing, and, the,
seconds.
and the thing is, these days, everything is so much about trends. And
Mhm.
then what you have is an awful lot of followers. And it's like you said with the whole psych rock thing. You have so many people copying, and when you put something in a photocopier, it gets that little bit more faded, doesn't it? So it just takes a bit of time for everything then to just become stale, doesn't it? Because everybody's just copying everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. Oh no, I was just gonna say, and that's why, you know, it's better to burn out than to fade away. Right.
Yeah, sure.
And it's funny to hear that in context of the conversation that we're currently having, because originally a Neil Young lyric became famous because Kurt Cobain, of course, wrote it in his suicide letter.
Mhm.
And then it became a fucking t-shirt, right?
Mm.
So many people, the reason why I bring it up is so many people are perfectly capable and willing to fade away
Mhm.
Yeah.
as far as what they do artistically.
Yeah.
Did I write the greatest album ever made? No, I did not. Nowhere close. And I would never consider myself to be a genius nor like some transcendent artist. I'm learning my way. Maybe one day people will speak of me in the same vein that they speak of the people that I consider to be that. But what my goal and what my purpose is as far as being an artist and being a musician is writing music that hopefully will not fade away. And I have no interest in grabbing onto whatever's popular at this very moment just for the immediate success. And that's why, I mean, in my opinion, I released a couple singles off the album, but I don't think there's a single off on this album. I think it's an album. It's an album's worth of music. It takes time to dedicate to it. And that for me is the most important thing about making music and doing what I do, is to have it have staying power, and to not just fade away. I'll burn out before that happens,
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
And with that in mind, then, I mean, how much do you think music and telling stories through music is about truth, honesty?
How much? I would say there's less than 1% of music out there that's truly being made and honest.
Yeah, but in terms of your own music, I mean, how do you feel about it? And in terms of the songs being a snapshot of time, and whether that reflects a degree of transparency, I guess, and truth, and reflecting yourself in that music, I suppose.
Well, I think if I could pat myself on the back for anything, I think that I wrote a really honest record. I think as far as the lyrical content is concerned, it's pretty transparent. And sure, are there some metaphorical ideas in it? Yeah, maybe some, but there's a lot that's truly on the nose. I mean, in the first song on the album, I pretty much make it clear, like, hey, I was a fucking drug addict, and I'm not anymore. But that's what this next 43 minutes is going to be about, is letting you know what I consider to be, probably the worst version of myself, and putting it out there and letting you know, like, it's okay to recognize that, and you can still be a good person thereafter. And I mean, I've been very hesitant about going too deep on a lot of this stuff, as far as talking about it, because again, I like to believe that the music's expresses the ideas that I have about myself and who I was as a person. But one thing I do want to kind of make clear to anybody who does listen to this record, I'm not a sad boy. Like, I mean, this music is incredibly sad because of the content that it's about, and it's a bit of a task to put yourself through emotionally listening to it. But there's a reason why I made this my first record, because if I didn't do this now, I was never going to be able to truly move on from it. And that's why it's an important, it'll probably be the most important album I ever make, not because it's my first one, but because it gave me the ability to move the fuck on.
Yeah.
And to really, from this point on, not only know that being honest in my music as far as what I talk about, it's okay, but also, like, I'm a pretty happy guy. I got a lot of, joy in me, and I want to be able to share that. But I had to be able to share this first.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you lay your soul out and then leave it bare and then step over it and carry on.
Exactly. And I mean, and the one thing you want, I think, for me anyway, as an artist or musician, is like, I want people to listen to this that need to listen to something like this. Like, those are the people that I truly want to hear this album, is like somebody that was as confused as I was, and just as self-destructive as I once was, to hear this and be like, all right, this guy, he was a pretty big fuck up, and he managed to move through this, so maybe I can too. And I mean, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, the things that resonated with me most, because, like a lot of teenagers, especially nowadays, you are super, super depressed, and you're going through puberty, you're confused with everything about the world. And the things that resonated with me most on a deep, deep, like, emotional level were sometimes the most bleak, as far as what the music was speaking about. I mean, I mentioned all those Britpop bands, but one band I kind of refrain from mentioning is Radiohead. And I think when it comes to them, the reason why I generally don't mention them too much is because they've had more than enough, recognition. I think anybody that's making music nowadays that doesn't, like, say in some way or another, even if they don't like them, that Radiohead, they became like the new Beatles to me, like, meaning everything that was made after the 60s was in some way, shape, or form influenced by the Beatles or Chuck Berry, right? That's in the rock and roll realm. Radiohead is that for the 90s, I think. They made indie rock possible. Like, they made experimental music popular. But at the same time, what they did do for me personally is they discussed isolation, loneliness, all the things that the traditional pop song does not talk about. And they made it an incredibly massive career based off of that type of music. I remember that documentary that was released back in the late 90s around the OK Computer tour, where one of these, I'll call him cheeky, I think he was a BBC reporter, was like, and now more music to cut your wrists to. And they went into No Surprises by Radiohead. And or actually the quote was, now more music to slit your wrists to. But the funny thing about them is that, I mean, they were incredibly bleak, but they also gave a place in the world for people like me, kids like me, who needed to hear music like that. And hopefully I can do the same for other people.
All right, cool.
Yeah. And I'm by no means comparing myself to Radiohead, just so we can make that just so we can have clarity.
All right, then, Michael, thank you for talking to us.
No, thank you. This has been fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good, man. It's nice to talk to you. Nice to let off a bit of steam.
Yeah, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I can be a bit self-indulgent at times.
No, you're okay, because Tez was expecting a hip hop artist anyway. So.
Oh, okay. We can restart and we can go with that line. And But
yeah, I don't know what I was listening to. I was like, who's this guy?
well, I appreciate you guys, taking the time to talk to me, and thank you for listening to the album. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Very good. And I hope you get some success with it.
oh, thank you very much. Yeah, and it's looking like we're going to be over in your neck of the woods next year, so maybe we can
Wow.
I can always figure out a way to get in contact with you guys and get you out to a show or something.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, that'd be cool, man. Especially if you come to the Netherlands.
Yeah, I mean, look, I alluded to I got into a lot of trouble when I was younger there, and don't remember much of it. So maybe this is a time to go back and make a bit more memorable experience that I'll retain.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you're still on a list over there of some kind.
The only list I'm on, I think, is in Las Vegas. That's the only place I'm on a permanent list.
Oh.
I got thrown out of a Brian Wilson concert there. So it was, and then immediately, like I speak in hyperbole a bit, but literally got kicked out of the city of Las Vegas, got escorted out by the police into Barstow.
Oh, right, okay.
It was my own fear and loathing experience, but we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, that's another episode.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gents.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And take care.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.